This is Tommy's Outdoors 128. Have you ever wondered about land access rights? Should it be free for everybody or should it be limited in some way? There's a lot of discussion about this subject right now. And today, this is one of the topics I discuss with Ian Carter, the author of the book Rhythms of Nature. Ian was our guest in episode 105 with his previous book, and today he's back with his new book. And we discuss this and many more interesting topics. And we also talk about the books. And this is first of the two episodes where I talk with authors of books about nature. And I will strive to release those episodes week after week. So I'm switching from my usual bi-weekly, meaning every 2 weeks schedule to weekly schedule, just because I have so many episodes in the pipeline and I don't like sitting on the episodes. So this is first of the two book-themed episodes. And just a reminder that you can buy those books, all the books I'm interviewing authors, as well as those that I review on my blog. You can buy those books through affiliate links on tommysoutdoors.com/books, or just go to the description of this show. And by buying the books through affiliate links, you are helping me with ever-growing costs of running this podcast. Okay? Obviously, your price is not changing. So that's one thing. Another new thing is that I have a newsletter, Tommy's Outdoors newsletter, and it is very important to me that you subscribe to this newsletter. Okay? No spam. You will get an email, and we get this newsletter twice in a month, maybe 3 times in a month. And you will get notification there about the new episodes of the podcast, blogs, as well as new Tommy's Outdoors projects, new and exciting projects, and changes, because changes are coming to Tommy's Outdoors podcast. So get onto that newsletter, newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com, or again, just go to the description of this show and find a link there to the newsletter and put your email in. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I'm sure you will enjoy that newsletter too. And finally, you can support me directly by buying me a coffee, buymeacoffee.com/Tommy'sOutdoors, or again, go into the description of this show. Like, description of this show is like a little newsletter in itself. So just go in there, check all the links, buy the book, subscribe to the newsletter, buy me a coffee. And if I had to pick one thing, if you want to do only one thing out of those 3, I would pick newsletter. It is really important to me. So you get into that newsletter, and it is important to you as well to stay in touch with all the upcoming news and changes that are coming to Tommy's Outdoors. Okay, that's it for this introduction. And folks, now Ian Carter and Rhythms of Nature. Ian Carter, good to see you again, my man. How you doing?
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, I'm all good. Thank you. Really good.
Fantastic. We are here to talk about your new book, Rhythms of Nature. And for people who are new here, they can go back and listen to our podcast about your old book. It was episode 105, titled Human Nature. And this is your old book, so people can listen back to that. And today we're going to talk about your new book. And interesting thing is that in that new book, there were certain events happen. There are record of events happening while we were recording the previous episode of the podcast.
Absolutely, yeah.
I found it really, I was listening. It was like, oh, this has actually happened when we were recording the very podcast. So you were dealing with some foxes in your yard, in your backyard, and from your book, our 12-strong flock of hens was too great a temptation, and individuals were being picked off one by one. The long grass of the rewilded lawn offered a thick cover so the hunter could slip unseen to within striking range. The cockerel did his best, calling frantically, once memorably, including on the podcast. That's our podcast. And charging towards danger when the hen had been caught. But he was as powerless as we were. Before long, we were down to 6 hens and felt obliged to pen the survivors out of harm's way.
Yeah,
that was happening. So, well, I hope that today No hens will be harmed during making of this podcast.
No, we've moved house and there are no hens, so I can guarantee you there may be some sheep bleating in the background is as much as I can promise you, I think.
Okay, so that's gonna be in your next book. What was going on? Okay, Ian, what is the one thing about your new book that you're most proud of?
That's a very good question. Tough question to start with. I suppose it's the last book was more almost written by accident. I was kind of frustrated working in conservation, took early retirement. I had a lot on my mind and there were some conservation issues I wanted to talk about. And I'd already written some things down, part essays, part short chapters, and put it all together. And it turned into a book a little bit by accident. Rhythms of Nature was when I'd fully retired, moved down to Devon, wanted to get back, really connect more with the natural world, and made a conscious effort to do so. And I kind of knew by then that I would be putting it together in the book. So to make all that happen, and as a deliberate project, I guess was the difference between the two books.
Yes, and for me, I must admit I enjoy your style of writing, and I was kind of like. It was really nice to read this sort of the book again. And for me, this is for people who watching this on YouTube. That's the book. I just want to acknowledge. I don't know whether it's the best thing, but I just want to acknowledge how well put together the book is. It's a quality object to hold in hand, and the paper and the typesetting is perfect. It's very readable. It's beautiful. It's really well made, and the format it's a small book, but it's almost square, which means when you're reading, it's comfortable to read because the lines are longer. When you have those small books, the lines tends to be short. It's hard to read, but this is like very well put together. So shout outs to Pelagic Publishing for putting that book together. And I just wanted to acknowledge that's maybe typography geek in me, but I'm paying attention to those things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, actually. I think there's the standard format for hardbacks, and I think some people think, well, it's not a proper book if it's not that full-size standard hardback. But I find with, they're quite hard to hold and to you sort of harder to hold with one hand anyway. And that, I sent that a copy to my parents, and my mum said, that's the perfect size. It goes straight into my handbag. It's a perfect fit. So she was pleased with the size there.
Yeah. Okay, so that's validated. That's validated. That's right. Very good. Very good. Okay, you talk about a lot of things in your book, and people should definitely read that book. And as always, the link is in the description of this show, where you can go and click and buy the book. And so today we're not going to cover obviously everything, but I just want to pick out a few topics. Some of them are very, current. Some of them are subject to heated debates. And obviously, what I like to do on the podcast is discuss heated subjects in a civilized manner. And the first one is land access. So again, from your book, to kick us off, I have another way of exploring new places. I get myself dropped off in a remote spot with an agreed pickup point a few miles away, on the far side of an appealing tract of countryside. Importantly, the drop-off point and pickup points are not readily connected by roads or public footpaths. This is about trying to find a way across landscape that would otherwise be difficult to explore. These walks are a somewhat less rigorous version, Trespass Walk, pioneered by Edwardian Times traveler and journalist Stephen Graham. He took a compass and, having arbitrarily picked a direction, north say, he followed it resolutely to the guidance of the magnetic needle. The title of his book, A Gentle Art of Tramping, hints at his reasons of doing this. He goes to explain. It takes you the most extraordinary way and show what an enormous amount of face of the earth is kept from feet of ordinary humanity by the fact of private property. This is still very much true today. Access rights in England and Wales cover only a tiny proportion of the land.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's very true. Yeah, I mean, Yeah, we have some open access in England, some open countryside that you where you can go. But if you don't happen to live near one of those areas, then that's no good. And of course, we have the footpaths, and people often point to the network of footpaths and say, "Well, what's the problem?" They have this wonderful network of footpaths, and it's great to have that. But my argument is, if you have a huge area of land and you have a footpath going across it, that's just one very thin 2 meter wide line that's been chosen for you, the route's chosen for you. That's not really exploring the landscape. If something interesting happens in the wood away to one side, or you like the look of a bit of habitat and want to explore further to see what birds might be breeding there or what plants are growing there, you can't do that from the footpath. So yes, that's why I think better access rights are really, really important. And having just moved to Scotland actually recently, a few months ago, here we do have that greater access, and it's absolutely fantastic. And I would really go as far to say as it can be life-changing, simply to be able to get out there and not have to worry about gamekeepers or farmers telling you, leaping on you and saying you can't come here. You can go. You've got to act responsibly, but you can go anywhere in the countryside, and it's really fantastic.
Like out of all the topics and all the issues I talk about, this one is that I am most on the fence on this one. If I were given the powers of the ruler of the universe, I couldn't make a decision quickly on like what do I want to do, because on one hand I completely agree with you, not being landowner myself. I want to be able to go and explore and see things, especially being hunter and angler. But on the other hand, I can imagine being a landowner and not wanting, just random people having right to wander around my land. So I'm not sure which is the right one.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is tricky, and I suppose I can see it from a landowner's point of view. I mean, I suppose, everybody has selfish tendencies, and if you are the one that owns that tract of land, I can understand why you just want it all to yourself to do your own thing, and you don't want any disturbances from other people. But I think, from my point of view, we've as not being a landowner, surely we should be doing things for the sort of greater good and open things up as far as is reasonable, without causing too many problems. It's right to open things up to people that are in a less fortunate position, and obviously there are lots of people that don't own anything. They might live in an urban area with no access to any land, or at best a green park with very little wildlife. And I think it, benefits for society, I suppose, in terms of opening up these areas, and benefits for the environment in the longer term, because it's important that as many people as possible care about wildlife in the countryside and want to protect it. And how can you possibly care about it if you can't see it? And there's huge areas of England, especially huge estates, people aren't allowed in there, don't get to see it, and therefore don't come to care about the countryside and the wildlife that lives there.
Is that what I think that was you who said that the right to roam goes hand in hand with conservation. I don't want to put the words in your mouth, but this is something I think out
conservation somewhere. Well, and I would say responsibility. So I don't think it absolutely should not be a free-for-all. It's not just people can go anywhere and do anything. And in Scotland, it comes with codes of practice and guidance and educational materials. So it's a right. I think it's called a right of responsible access. And absolutely, I mean, landowners need protections. You can't just go anywhere and do anything if that would be overly disruptive to wildlife. So it does come with limitations and restrictions, and I think that's quite right. But certainly in England, there are just huge areas where I don't think there'll be many problems if people are allowed to go there. But they're just closed off at the moment.
When you were talking about those restrictions and responsible access, that sounded to me awfully like a footpath again.
Well, no, I don't. And the footpath is too restrictive, I think, because you can have a square kilometre of countryside with lots of bits of scrub and woodland and really nice areas to explore, and your access is 2 meters wide in a straight line that somebody's already decided for. It might take you through the dullest part of the countryside. Often it does it goes across the fields and doesn't go through the woodland. So to me, that's too restrictive. But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be restrictions and limitations. And I think by and large, it works pretty well. I mean, lots of countries have got this. It's not just Scotland isn't unusual. Lots of countries have got this. Where they have it, it seems to work pretty well generally. There are problems that need managing. I accept that. There are issues that arise. But for me, the pros greatly outweigh the cons.
Mm-hmm. What limitations would you see? What do you think are reasonable limitations?
I think the obvious ones in terms of respecting people's privacy. So you can't just sort of walk up to people's gardens and houses. Just responsible things like you don't want to go crashing through crop fields, destroying the crop and causing damage. You don't want to be just leaping over stone walls and fences, again causing damage to property. There's the obvious things like not leaving litter, but I mean, I think people mostly know that that's bad behaviour anyway. I mean, the idiots out there who are going to drop litter all over the place and cause these harms, they're not going to respect the legislation anyway. So I don't think open access would make much difference to people like that. The other restriction, which is a good one, a conservation one, is, I mean, wildlife has legal protection. So, for example, Schedule 1 birds, some of the rarer vulnerable breeding birds, it is illegal to disturb them, close to their nest site. So although we've got open access in Scotland, if I realise that I've stumbled close to a golden eagle nest, legally I have to withdraw immediately. And if I know the nest is there, I have to avoid that area in order to prevent those birds being disturbed. So that's an example of a conservation a restriction, if you like.
Yeah, you touch on the disturbance, and I think outside of a litter and obvious unsociable behavior, which is kind of obvious, and like you said, the disturbance to birds and the wildlife, that's the one of the concerns that are raised quite often by the opponents of open access. And like the example that you gave, about the nest of the eagle or something, but you're a naturalist, you wrote like a number of books about it, you work about it, you know these things. So people might not even know that there is a nightingale in a scrub or something, and those birds will be just people won't even know.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. That's true in the areas that are open access currently. I mean, in England, we forget, but a lot of the mountain and moorland areas are already open access, and the heathland, open grassland. But it doesn't seem to cause huge problems. I mean, occasionally there might be a problem. Someone might accidentally go too close to a nest or not realise it's there. I mean, that can happen. I suppose one argument is the bigger areas you open up, the more of the countryside that you open up, the thinner these problems are likely to be spread. So the more restrictions you have, the more you concentrate people in areas where they are permitted to go, the more chance you've got of causing serious problems. And I think that's partly what happens now. People are forced to flock to areas where they are allowed to go, and they do that. And, with large numbers of people, that can cause problems. So perhaps spreading the problem a bit more thinly, giving people more choices, reduces the chance of serious problems cropping up.
Yeah. No, that's a, that sounds a little bit like this mathematical problem, whether it's going to be more disturbance if you concentrate people in one places and then there's no people in other places, or whether you spread them thin and then. But I
Yeah,
don't
I
think this
agree.
is
Yeah,
this is something we can easily. It
no,
feels like a mathematical problem to come up with a number and say which one is which. But it's an interesting point. But I noticed while I was reading the book, I noticed that you were talking about the birds that fly away when you were walking with the binos. So you were wondering yourself, like, I wonder what is the impact on those birds, the extra energy that they exert, and they're doing that for no good reason because you're just walking and they're just so that will be happening as well. So you're not oblivious to these potentially negative impacts of the open access.
yeah. No, I think that's true. I think we have to accept that whenever we go into the countryside, we are go. If you go close to a bird, it will fly away, because humans have got a bit of history with birds, and birds know what might be coming if they don't clear off. So yeah, I think again, it's a matter of balance, I suppose. I don't think we should just fence off huge areas and set them aside purely for wild. It needs to be managed in a way so that the disturbance is reasonable and not going to cause significant problems. But yeah, whenever you go close to a bird, whether that's in your garden or on the footpath or wherever it is, the birds are going to be disturbed to some extent. But it's managing it and keeping it sensible, I think.
Yeah, it also goes with the education for some level of education for those people who are granted access to know like basic things. Maybe not don't go shouting or stuff.
Yeah, no,
like
I think
this.
that's true. I mean, I think a lot of it is lack of education. So I know there's a lot of issues on the coast, especially in England, with birds trying to breed on the coast, waders, ring plovers, tern colonies. And conservationists can get hugely frustrated because people just let the dog off, and the dog runs across to the tern colony. And if there's a warden there, he'll go across and say, "Look, your dog has just caused all these birds to fly up. The chicks are now at risk." And often people, I don't think, realise what the problem is, and sometimes they might get a bit aggressive and say, "Well, look, it's my dog, and I need to give it exercise, and I'll do what I want, and I'm allowed to do that." More often than not, I think they would say, "Right, I didn't realise that." So education, signage, opening up areas where the birds aren't breeding. So you try to encourage people to those areas. Maybe fencing off with tern colonies. They're often sort of fenced off with signs up there to try and discourage people from causing too many problems.
Fortress conservation.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, but you're right. I think even people who are initially aggressive in those cases, they might come back home and sleep on it and have a second thought. And the next time, because this is like a psychological reaction, like, oh, what are you like? Oh, right? You're getting in this human on human kind of interaction. But then once you drop the seed and they kind of sleep on it and think on it, and the next time they're with the dog on the beach and it's going, now I know. So I think this is this element as well that people, some of them at least, eventually will come to these conclusions. Would you be in favor of, for example, whether landowners or not the game wardens, like rangers, being able to still close parts of the land for conservation reasons? And I understand that this is kind of flies in the face of what we're trying to do here, because I guess that the main premise is like to get access to this wildlife and be able to experience nature and everything, which is something you talk about in your book a lot and in your previous book. But then, I'm saying, like, would you be in favor of actually, limiting access to the very thing you're advocating for people to have access? But then, I'm trying to kind of find like a middle ground between opening up more access and people being able to go in and still identifying like a critical areas where, like, sorry, or maybe just limit the access there.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's actually essential. It needs to happen. There are some areas where you just don't want people going into these areas would cause too much disturbance. So I'm thinking of reserves where you've got huge concentrations of geese that are feeding in on the nature reserve, maybe a small area that's been set aside for the geese, and you might have 20,000 birds there. And if you allow people to go in there, especially walking the dogs, the geese are constantly going to be flying up and disturbed and expending energy. And absolutely that there should be restrictions, whether that's formal sort of legal restrictions or just signs and ways of managing people, so you're encouraging them away from those areas. And that happens. I mean, again, in Scotland, there is open access here, but there are nature reserves where you have the concentrations of water birds, for example, and certainly people will be discouraged from going to the areas where those birds are going to be disturbed. So there might be hides where you can watch from a safe distance, or there might be access to up to a certain point, but please don't go beyond this point because you'll disturb all these birds. So yeah, absolutely, there's ways of doing it, and it seems, again, there's always going to be problems that need sorting out. There's always going to be people that ignore common sense or the rules. But yes, there are rules. There are restrictions that are going to be required and necessary, I think.
Yeah. So you're clear on that. Have you ever had like unpleasant encounters with the landowners on your walks?
Oh yeah, a lot, all the time. Yeah, I mean,
really?
Oh, it's not that common, but I've been doing it for so long, I suppose, that yeah, it does happen. And by and large, if I'm approached by a landowner, I mean, I in England, I would trespass quite a lot. Again, not to cause problems and not trying to meet people, actually trying to avoid being seen by the landowner, but just exploring areas. And I think people forget, actually, that is something you are entitled to do. I mean, it's not an offence as such to stray off the footpath and trespass. The important thing is that if you are approached by the landowner and the landowner asks you to leave, you then are obliged to leave. If they say, this is private, we don't want you here, please leave immediately. You are then, but if you then dig in your heels and say, sorry, mate, I'm staying put, then you commit the offence. And that's what I do. If I'm caught out and told to leave, I will do so, perhaps increasingly maybe with a few words about, am I really causing a problem? Maybe that's where you can get into the argument and a bit of unpleasantness, but it's not normally a big problem.
Were those encounters, did you felt like they were unreasonable, or could you see their side when they were asking you to leave?
Well, I feel it's unreasonable because the thing I would tend to say is, am I causing a problem? And normally, when I make sure that I'm not causing a problem, so I'm not trampling through crops, I'm not clambering over fences in a way that would damage them. So normally I'm just in a wood looking at wildlife. So that if I'm in a bit of an argumentative mood, that might be my question. Is this causing a problem? And landowners generally struggle with that. Very often they resort to things that I think are a little bit spurious. So often they will say, well, do you realize there's deer stalking takes place here? You could be in danger. And I say, well, surely they're not going to shoot a human. No, surely they're just going to shoot the deer. So
I heard stories, Ian. I heard stories.
Really? Okay. Oh, maybe it is true then.
yeah. Like, if there is like an active deer stalking going there, I wouldn't go there without wearing, blaze orange at least.
They do in America, don't they? They wear the luminous. Well, the hunters, I think, wear luminous jackets.
There's some states mandate that, but I actually do have also like a hat or a vest, and on some occasions, like when I go on a farm and I see the other car parked, I'm putting my blaze orange vest.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's. I met the guy on the shooting range one day. He's a wildlife ranger, and he said like, "Tommy, be careful. It's Wild West out there." Just like okay.
Yeah. Right.
So
Okay.
but was there? I'm sure there was also cases when you said like, I'm here watching wildlife, and then they said like, yeah, okay, because I mean, like when someone starts talking with you, they can kind of see that you're a reasonable guy and you're not causing problems. So I'm sure you had also like a positive experience when you were once you were.
I have had that. Yeah, I've had that with you meet the landowner, and I'm I always sort of try to keep it a friendly conversation. I explain what I'm doing, and I hope I'm not causing any problems. And they might then, if they're interested, they might say, what have you seen then? And I explain what I've seen. And sometimes it ends by, well, we don't want to open it up for everybody, but we can see you're not causing any problems, and carry on. It's fine. So yeah, it does go that way sometimes.
Exactly. This is my kind of observation as well. And what one of the farmers told me, I don't know how, it's probably not true always for everybody, but what he said, like what they don't like, and especially he was talking about his neighbor, that when they see people on their land and those people see them, they turn around and walk away and just run, and they don't like it. So he said, like, when you see the landowner, when you see someone, actually go to them, say hello, say something. And I think it's kind of reasonable, because then you're kind of showing that you have nothing to hide. You're actually going to that person, say, hey, is this your land? This is a beautiful piece of land, and I enjoy this. And I find that sometimes they're going to tell you, like, yeah, there's a deer over there, and we see, like, and you have this conversation, and there's this connection, and then often at the end they said, like, yeah, you're welcome here to be. I actually had a more than one pieces of land, like a farms, when I can hunt deer now, because I just strike a conversation with a farmer who was there, and it's like, yeah, sure, it's like. So I think this is a good advice to, like I said, be friendly, explain what you're doing. Don't get a attitude of like, oh, you're bad and I have all the rights here if you don't. So and like, this brings me to the final point I want to make on that. Why do you think that this has to be mandated? Because you're like, I think mostly agreeing with, like, you don't want everybody everywhere, but you want those interested people to have an opportunity. So, and I think it's down to opportunity. Why do you feel like just being able to ask landowner for permission is not enough? Why do you think like this has to be mandated, like from the top down, like, oh, there's an open access, rather than maybe just facilitate to ability to contact landowner and send them email, or call them up and say, like, hey, this is I'm Tommy, you have this piece of land, I would like to go there. And do you think it wouldn't be enough?
Yeah, I mean, from a selfish point of view, I must admit I'm not unhappy from a personal point of view with the situation as it is, because I'm quite happy to take a bit of a risk, and I must admit I wouldn't approach a landowner if I saw them. If I can stay under the radar when I'm out there and I know I'm on a private estate, I will do, but certainly won't actively hide or run away. If you bump into somebody, you start the conversation. It works for me. I think if you're used to doing it, if you've lived in the countryside and watched wildlife for a long time, that can work really, really well. It does work well. I think the problem, two problems. Firstly, for people that maybe don't spend as much time in the countryside, it does exclude people. It sets up a barrier. Some people are not comfortable finding the landowner and talking to them. They're worried about what the landowner might say, or they just simply don't know who to contact, and they won't take the risk of going into the wood and taking a chance of bumping into them because they're worried about the consequences. So particularly the people we need to get to most, maybe to get them more enthusiastic about wildlife and protecting it can be restrictive. And the other problem would be, although a lot of landowners would be great and accessible and allow people to allow people access. There are some that simply, probably quite a high, significant proportion that would simply say, no, sorry, this is my estate. There's a large wall around it, and that wall is there for a reason, and it's to keep people out because I want it to do my things, and it's for my hunting, my personal hunting, and my friends to come, and I don't want interference and disturbance. So some people wouldn't play along with that sort of spirit. So those are the two main reasons, I think.
No, and again, I see both sides, and I'm totally with you on the fact that some people will just, that would be, somehow mentally unsurmountable for them to ask for access, and what are we going to say? And they're just, people are different. People are shy. People are, don't have this level of want of going out there if they had to put this work. But I also understand, like, that's my land, and I just, want to do whatever, hunt deer there or whatever, and it's tough. It's tough. I don't have like a good idea how to do this, so everybody is happy. How does it work in Scotland? You seems to be in favor of the model that is in Scotland.
Yeah, Scotland. So essentially, it's called, I think, a right of responsible access. So there's a whole set of, there's guidance and there's rules that you are obliged to follow. And I must say, we've only been here a few months, so I'm not an expert in exactly what the rules are, but there'll be restrictions in terms of dogs on leads, the way you should behave. You're in the countryside, not leaving. Mostly it's sort of obvious common sense things, but common sense maybe only to people that are used to doing this. Maybe if you're new to exploring the countryside, it's not common sense, but not climbing over fences when they could be damaged, not leaving gates open, not letting your dog go near livestock.
Gates. Mm-hmm.
Get a work, yeah, and that can cause huge problems. So it's a right of responsible access. There's rules, restrictions, guidance that goes along with it. But essentially, as long as you behave reasonably, you can effectively go anywhere you want to in the countryside, and you can also camp anywhere. So again, with some restrictions about close to people's houses, and I think there are one or two areas where there have been significant problems with large numbers of people coming and camping, and there might be bylaws there that do actually restrict it. But again, generally, you can camp where you want to.
Yeah, see, this is good where the regulations are locally adjusted to the specificity of the site or demand for that site, and then you're adjusting that. Yeah, that's a good thing. Like, it's interesting, and again, the more we talk about it, the more I'm kind of not sure of my views on that, because on one hand we said like, yeah, there need to be more access, and we're talking about those people who are living in the cities, and like you said, they have no idea, and they could get more, let's call it love for nature if they have this access. On the other hand, for me, one of the things that could prevent like an excessive number of people going somewhere is how hard it is to get there, because like there's no car park, for example, close to the place. That weeds out 80% of people straight away. I always give this example, which is kind of extreme example, but it's there's in Alaska there is the unit where you can draw the elk tag, and once you draw that elk tag, the Game and Wildlife Agency or whatever it's called, they send you a letter, which is almost like actively discouraging you to go there. It's like, yeah, it's going to be rainy and there's going to be wind and there are big bad bears. And if you kill elk within hours, a bear will try to climb the carcass, don't go there. And it's like that weeds out people. So then, really people who really want go there, and that's, kind of ensures that there's not much of the disturbance. So like you said in the beginning, really, this is about this balance.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the problems are exaggerated, because I think you're right. Most people want that easy access, and that's fine. That suits them. They want to go to a car park with the family and the dog, and they want to walk, whether that's on a path or a clearly marked open area. They don't mind that there's lots of other people. maybe, and they do want that kind of access, and that's fine. So, I mean, here I've got the area where we live now. I've done various walks out into the hills. Everybody is allowed here. Anybody can walk there. I don't see another soul 99 times out of 100, or maybe the odd deer stalker, but people aren't suddenly swarming all over the countryside causing massive problems. And I think that would be true in most areas. You know, I don't think this is going to open up the floodgates and suddenly, you know, in most areas, there's not too many people that really want to completely get away from the path. But those that do, I think it should be made a bit easier than it is.
Yeah, I think you're right on this on this front. You know, like there's these people like you describe in the book when you go in somewhere and you try to imagine that you're like in a distant past where there's no humans. They just don't walk that way, don't look that way because there's a road. Like I love it, you know. I mean, I do it all the time. So people like that will go there. So listen, talking about land access and what people do on their land and how this might affect other land uses, it kind of is a segue or pivot into another issue that you talk about in your book in the chapter called Green on Pleasant Land. And I'm going to kick us off with a fragment from the book. Our home at the time was an isolated farmhouse in the Cambridgeshire fens, surrounded by arable land. The field on the far side of a channel of water running past the house had been growing oilseed rape until the recent harvest. Now it was a wide expanse of stubble. The lone shooter had concealed himself in a small cloth hide near the field edge. Over his head, wood pigeons were passing across, flying out from their overnight roost in search of food. It was mildly irritating to be woken up by gunshots, but things were about to get worse. Another shot, and then a wood pigeon flopped down onto the garden, bouncing a little on the turf. It was the first of several. The birds, not killed outright, carried on flying and instinctively tried to reach safety. Our garden, with its handful of mature trees, was the only cover for miles around, so that's where they headed. With their wings shattered by lead, they crashed rather than landed, before flapping weakly along the ground towards the hedge. It was left to me to deal with these birds. The shooter hadn't wanted to give game away by emerging from his hide, and in any case, he was on the other side of the water. That wasn't pleasant.
It wasn't very nice, and I think I'm reasonably robust in dealing with things like that, and I had to kind of kill them humanely, sort of as quickly as I could, and I was able to do that, although it wasn't pleasant. But I can imagine for other people that would have been really horrific. You know, I imagine a family with young children that really love animals and would have been potentially quite traumatized by that, and that would have stuck in their minds and for years to come. So yeah, that's just one example of bad practice, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you acknowledge in the book that this is not like a common thing. That was like particularly bad practice. This guy.
Yeah, I think so. I would say so. I mean, he did have a different view, because I did go and talk to him at the end of that, and I write about the discussion we had in the book. But he was one of the things I said was, you're very close to the house here, and he wasn't having that. He saw it as his job to. This was pest control. He actually mentioned, you want cheap food, don't you? These pigeons can cause problems. And I said, what about the injured birds? He says, well, I'm not trying to injure them. I'm not doing it deliberately. So this example he was quite old school and unrepentant, but I do think that probably is, that is the exception rather than the rule. And I would say that's an example of, shooting in an area where it wasn't really a good thing to do.
Yeah. So that was so-called pest control, really, rather than recreational shooting.
Well, that's an interesting question. With pigeons, the reason, the legal reason for killing them is because they can cause damage to crops. So it's pest control, but it's also very much a sporting bird. I think. I mean, a lot of people shoot pigeons because they enjoy the sport, and they will eat what they shoot. So the line between that is it's a little bit blurry and unclear. But by and large, if you're in an agricultural area and, if you're asked why you're shooting and you say, well, it's because these birds cause damage to crops, then I think you'd be on reasonably safe ground, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm really stunned, I think is the word, about the conflict in the UK. I don't think there's as much of it in Ireland, but in the UK, I think there's like a massive conflict between, shooting organizations and, non-shooting and anti-shooting and so on. And then, I tend to look at this globally, like I'm calling that hunting everything. And obviously within that you have shooting, which is bird shooting, bird hunting. And then you have fox hunting, which is illegal in the UK and still continue in the form of a trail hunting, which probably people who are interested in this knew about the not that recent but fairly recent events where there was kind of like a uncovered that what was going on really. What's your thoughts? Like, what is the root of this massive conflict, and if there is possibility to find, again, balance between people still being able to continue practice of shooting and hunting recreational and at the same time not causing, that much conflict. Maybe not causing conflict is kind of like a pointing finger, but kind of, both sides agreeing to each other's argument and finding this middle ground.
It's a shame, really. I mean, it has become polarized, but really, I mean, conservationists and people that enjoy hunting should be allies in a lot of respects, because we both want decent wildlife habitat and they both want a lot of wildlife out there, either to watch and enjoy or to be able to participate in the act of hunting. So I think the two could and should go together, and in some other countries that probably happens much, much more. From a personal perspective, I mean, I don't know whether this is an age thing or whether it's just encounters with bad practice, but I find, although I have no interest in shooting, I used to be much more accepting, and I find gradually, just by osmosis really, I have become more, I find myself becoming more hostile and more opposed to shooting and hunting generally. Now, as I say, that might be just an age thing. I think sometimes we get a bit softer as we get older, and the idea of killing for fun becomes less appealing. And there are some well-known examples of hunters that have hunted up to a point in their life and then they give it up because it no longer appeals. I mean, Aldo Leopold was one of them, and Sir Peter Scott, who founded the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, was another example of that. So it might be partly an age thing, but I do think a lot of the reason for the polarization is we're drip fed examples of what I would call bad practice and unsustainable activities. And I mean, I give examples in this chapter, but we have fox hunting that was banned by legislation to popular appeal in 2004, but it just carries on. That legislation is just ignored. The police seem, put it charitably, sort of reluctant to get involved. There's almost seems to be an understanding there. So, and when in Devon, you just used to watch this activity going on. So the legislation is ignored. That's, there's that. There's the illegal killing of raptors on, especially on grouse moors. It's especially, I mean, it happens elsewhere, but it's particularly concentrated there. So we have very few hen harriers when we should have lots. there's the continued use of lead ammunition, when we know and have known for years and years that lead causes major problems with secondary poisoning of both wildfowl and sometimes raptors that scavenge on the carcasses. And then there's the sort of sheer numbers of birds, sometimes the unsustainability of some forms of shooting. So the biomass of pheasants, the vast numbers of pheasants that are released into the countryside, it almost becomes a bit like target practice. The biomass of pheasants after they're released in an average year is the same as all our other birds put together. Now, if you suggested that as a new idea and it wasn't already happening, people would find that highly amusing, and you'd be laughed out of the room. But that's what happens, and those birds they don't stay on the shooting estates. They wander into people's gardens, onto nature reserves, and they cause all sorts of problems. Then the grouse, again, to go back to that, those birds aren't released, but to get the high densities, you need the predator control. Often that means raptors as well, because if you have raptors, you won't have the numbers of grouse. You have to burn them more, so you've got the smoke drifting into nearby villages. The water runs off more quickly. You've got flood issues sort of lower down the valley, and the carbon into the atmosphere at the same time. So for me personally, I've reacted to that over the years. I becoming less and less. I find it less and less easy to sympathize.
Just get tired with all that.
Yeah, and there seems to be a bit almost the intransigence. From my perspective, not being involved with the shooting community to respond to these issues. There doesn't seem to be. Some people do. There's some criticism, but there seems to be a reluctant intransigence. We've done this. We've always done this. We're going to carry on. You can't tell us what to do. And that I do fear that we are at this really highly polarized stage, and we're only getting further apart.
Yeah, a few things. What you said. Like first of all, I do believe this is, like I said, age thing with and you gave examples of the big guns from the conservation world, but even in episode 99, I was talking with the old hunter who's saying exactly the same thing. I already killed all that I got to kill, and I'm just gonna kill like one bird, like maybe deer. That's it. I don't do this anymore. And I remember when I was in a few years back in Poland, when I was I had this idea of looking at the bears and kind of like get observing birds and making photos. And I was staying with the old gamekeeper. He said the same thing. He said, like, I'm taking a rifle, but that rifle kind of walks me through the wood. That's what I'm taking, that rifle, but he said, like, I seldom shoot anything. And he can, because he got, like how the hunting works in Poland, that he is like there are some like levels of experience that gives you more permissions to do certain things. And so he's obviously many years in those hunting organizations, so he can, and he said, like, nah, I'm just walking. So I think I never got like a clear answer. I was kind of inquiring even in episode 99, and people who are interested in this conversation should go out and check that. I was even wondering whether it's with age we kind of feel more more conscious of our own mortality, and that's why I just wonder. I started fairly late with hunting, so like for me it's all still kind of like a interesting and kind of new, but I understand. I fully think this is the age thing. So that's one thing I just want to get it out there. On all those bad practices with the lead, like, in fairness, from where I sit, I think that in the UK, like the Basque, they voluntarily set out this program 5 years to phase out lead shot. I think they were kind of like a step ahead to, for example, what's in Ireland and in other countries, because that was at the time when I even make a couple of episodes and videos about the ECHA and EU and banning lead on the wetlands. which we gotta admit, there are problems with this legislation, because having like a Europe-wide blanket legislation for everything, again, it seldom works. And then at that time, all of a sudden, Basque came out with this plan. And I remember I was talking probably a week earlier with the chairman of Irish organization, National Council of Wildlife, some organization, NRIGC is called. When we were talking about this lead and how badly constructed the law is, and then a week later, Basque come out with that. And I remember I messaged him. It's like, well, so I think that's it, since they're doing that. And he goes like, oh my God, they're going to lose members. This is so many people upset, and so on and so forth. So that was a move that I thought was very positive, but that didn't help in, bridging that gap either.
To me, I mean, lead is an issue that it staggers me, actually, that it's still an issue. But for decades, literally for decades, and I worked in conservation for 25 years, and I was involved in the lead issue from quite an early stage, and calls to restrict the use, and we know what this is doing. But for all these years, decades, we know that if you put lead into the environment, it will, water birds especially will feed on it, and they will die. And there are estimates out there, and they're not head counts; they are estimates with an error bar on either side. But it's tens of thousands. We know, and we have known for years, tens of thousands of water birds die a slow death from lead poisoning because they ingest what shooters put into the environment. We've known that for so long. We know that raptors, when they come down and scavenge on the carcasses, will be killed, and that have
also
been
ingest
killed.
that. Mm-hmm.
They ingest the lead with the carcass. Yeah, we know that it's harmful to humans that are eating birds shot with lead. And while there are restrictions, quite rightly, on all meats sold in supermarkets for the levels of lead, there's an exemption for game birds, so there's no restrictions at all. So you can go today and buy game bird meat in supermarkets, and it will have lead, and that could be helping. The government advises for certain, to avoid eating it regularly of certain age groups, pregnant women, for example.
Oh, really?
Not to eat
so it's
it
like
at all.
open text advice to not eat it.
Yeah, that's government health advice. So we've known all this for so long, and shooters often talk about, and this is the thing I genuinely find hard to grasp. Shooters, and I believe it, they talk about respect for the quarry, and that I think that is a real thing. But and how can you have respect for your quarry if you are putting a toxic substance into their environment and knowing that tens of thousands will die a slow death, and the carcass won't be used for food? It'll just out there. So, that's been going on for so long. And finally, I think now, Basque, for example, see the writing on the wall in terms of legislation ahead and realize they have to act. But it's kind of kicking and screaming last resort when they feel they have no choice but to act. Finally, they're acting. But all those birds that have been killed in the meantime.
Yeah. No, it is coming for sure. It is coming for sure. And my take on this is like, hunters and shooters should really put it, the argument is like, oh, because this is expensive, because like there's no ammunition for that and no ammunition for something else. But, demand, like a customer demand will drive that. And if they're going to put the pressure and demand through their, gun shops and ammunition dealers, they will put this up the chain to the manufacturers, and they will eventually develop it. This is we don't have a lead in paints and lead in cosmetics, and we don't have a lead in I always say, like, the people who live now, like a younger generation, they just like, why this when you go on a petrol station, you have D for diesel, and then petrol is U, like, what it's U? Well, unleaded. People that don't even remember. Again, I remember these times when unleaded fuel supposed to be, is like, oh my god, the car industry will crash, the engines will not work, they're gonna there's gonna be all sorts of things. And now so I think this is coming, and this is not healthy for you either, for those of you who are listening to that and are still on the fence. The problems are with really microscopic lead particles that are moving with the bodily fluids huge distances in a carcass, whether it's a bird or deer or anything else. And if you're willing to look up the information and papers, it's not like you just gonna cut out meat around the shot wound. It really travels with the fluids in the muscles, and it can be found halfway through the carcass. So that's not good. And the last thing on this subject, Ian, I also think this is very unfortunate, because hunters and anglers and conservationists and naturalists, like you said, we all really want the same thing. But I think there's like people on both sides, they have so much history with each other that sometimes I feel like unless they all gonna change, there's no chance to finding, because of the history they have with each other. It's nothing to do with regulations than anything else. And also I do think, and this hurts me, that a lot of these hunting organizations, they just fail to adapt. It's like, like old guards are in the, committees and management organizations, and they just, don't grasp the use of technology and modern communications. They just fail to adapt, and that hurts me, because I feel like I would like, again, like hunters and naturalists, like hold hands and work for the environment. And
I think it's a shame, because I think hunting, restrictions on the types of hunting that you're allowed to carry out, and restrictions on countryside sports, if you like, it's only going in one direction. And you can look back to what we did 100 years ago, or even longer, and gradually it's in one direction. There are more and more restrictions on how you can use general licenses, species removed from those licenses because of conservation concerns, species removed from the quarry list. So it used to be curlew and Brent geese were quarry species in the UK, and now they've come off. Hunting, fox hunting, supposedly there's legislation there. So it's all going in, the restrictions on lead are coming. It's all going in one direction. I feel that the shooting community would benefit from support from conservation, and they would get that support if there was more of a push towards sustainable activities. And I used to be in that camp. I'm gradually becoming less and less sympathetic, as I said. But I think this intransigence, if you like, is hastening this direction of travel, and it's not a good thing for the hunting and shooting community, if you like.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what I think, that there is a need for adapting to a new situation if you want hunting and shooting continue and be available as an activity in the future. And kind of like a more proactive role is required, rather than only kind of like a hitting the brakes, because I think like for now it's just only hitting the brakes. And I think there's also specificity of what's going on in the UK, because, for example, in Europe, there's also push and pull, and the situation in France with shooting, there's a lot of conflict there as well, mainly around bad practices, mainly about when the people get shot in their backyard because of a poor practice. But overall in Europe, the big mammals are coming back, and the animals that were removed from the game list are put back on the game list because their population recovered. So this is possible, but changes are for sure required, and people get rid of this lead ammunition. This is just not healthy for you. Ian, I want to finish with a I feel like we just got very like negative, and but I think it's important to say, like, your book is not like that. You're talking about these things, and we kind of picked out them for the podcast to kind of talk about them, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who are curious about your views, and kind of will be happy to hear that conversation. But overall, the book is quite nice and upbeat on many occasions. Descriptions of nature and exploring the nature, and I like that tip that you gave it about the moon. When you look at the moon and you see like it was a B or D, so you know whether it's going to the full moon or other. It's great for anyone who's interested in nature and these things. A great book, and I want to end up with actually part of the interview that you gave. I think that's an interview that you gave to the publisher, Pelagic Publishing, when you said, "It is often said that we're wrecking the planet, but despite our excesses, the planet will be fine. Considered on a long enough timescale, what we do today is all but irrelevant. There have been mass extinctions before, and they will happen again, perhaps many times, no matter what humans get up to. That mustn't be used as an excuse for inaction. But I find it only oddly reassuring. And man, I'm the same. It's like, like even the planet will be destroyed, like whatever. I do feel that reassuring. I didn't find that odd at all.
Yeah, it's just it could be used as an excuse for inaction. I mean, it is just purely a little self-defense thing, because there's so many people that are interested in wildlife and have a bit of knowledge about what's going on and can see what's happening. You could so easily slump into abject despair and just not enjoy going out into the countryside anymore. The whole experience could be changed because everything could, so depressing in the direction we're heading in. But we do need to act. It's absolutely essential that we do act and minimize the harms we're causing. So I'm not saying we should forget about any of that and take the pressure off, but just as a personal thing, when I go out and about, I try to think in terms of these big time scales. We're here for a short time. Whatever we do, we're kind of irrelevant in the greater scheme of things. We're not going to be around in whatever, a few years' time. There's wildlife all around. There's still interesting things to see. There's warblers singing in the woods. There's swallows and house martins flying around. There's things to see. We've wiped out an awful lot. And if you're pessimistic and you focus on that, then you could get quite depressed. But there's so much wildlife still out there that maybe we'll look back if there's people still around in 300 years' time, maybe they'll look back at this as a golden age when we still had deer and badgers and foxes and all these breeding birds. So, you've got to make the most of what is out there and take the positives from it, I think. So that's what I try to do with that little tip.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Ian. Listen, thank you so much for your time. It's been great conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you. And folks, go and buy the book. The title is Rhythms of Nature, Wildlife and Wild Places Between the Moors. Ian Carter. The link is in the description of the show. Click on that link and get the book. And thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tommy. Thanks.